Chapter 5. Prison. That night, when Rosa brought him dinner, Matt asked her when Maria was coming back. "Never," snarled the maid. "She and her sister have been sent home, and I say good riddance. Just because their father's a senator, the Mendoza girls think they can turn their noses up at us? Pah! Senator Mendoza isn't too proud to have his paw out when El Patron hands around money." Every day the doctor visited. Matt shrank from him, but the man didn't seem to notice. He grasped Matt's foot in a businesslike way, doused it with disinfectant, and checked the stitches. Once he gave Matt a shot of antibiotics because the wound looked puffy and the boy was running a fever. The doctor made no effort to start a conversation, and Matt was happy to leave things that way. The man talked to Rosa, however. They seemed to enjoy each other's company. The doctor was tall and bony. His head was fringed with hair like the fluff on a duck's bottom, and he sprayed saliva when he talked. Rosa was also tall and very strong, as Matt had found out when he tried to get around her. Her face was set in a permanent scowl, although she occasionally smiled when the doctor told one of his bad jokes. Matt found Rosa's smile even more horrid than her scowl. "El Patron hasn't asked about the beast in years," remarked the doctor. Matt understood that the beast was himself. "Probably forgotten it exists," muttered Rosa. She was busy scrubbing out the corners of the room. She was on her hands and knees with a bucket of soapy water by her side. "I wish I could count on it," the doctor said. "Sometimes El Patron seems definitely senile. He won't talk for days and stares out the window. Other times he's as sharp as the old bandido he once was." "He's still a bandit," said Rosa. "Don't say that. Not even to me. El Patron's rage is something you don't want to see." It seemed to Matt that both the maid and the doctor shivered slightly. He wondered why El Patron was so frightening, since the man was said to be old and weak. Matt knew he was El Patron's clone, but he was unclear about the meaning of the word. Perhaps El Patron had loaned him to Celia and would someday want him back. At the thought of Celia, Matt's eyes filled with tears. He swallowed them back. He would not show weakness in front of his tormentors. He knew instinctively they would seize on it to hurt him even more. "You're wearing perfume, Rosa," the doctor said slyly. "Ha! You think I'd put on anything to please you, Willem?" The maid stood up and wiped her soapy hands on her apron. "I think you're wearing it behind your ears." "It's the disinfectant I used to clean out the bath," said Rosa. "To a doctor, it probably smells good." "So it does, my thorny little Rosa." Willem tried to grab her, but she wriggled out of his arms. "Stop it," she cried, pushing him away roughly. In spite of her unfriendliness, the doctor seemed to like her. It made Matt uncomfortable. He felt the two were united against him. When they left the room, Rosa always locked the door. Matt tried the knob each time to see whether she had forgotten, but she never did. He pulled on the window bars. They were as firmly attached as ever. He sat disconsolately on the floor. If only he could see something interesting outside the window. A section of wall blocked off most of what lay beyond. Through a narrow gap he could see a green lawn and bright pink flowers, but only enough to make him want more. A thin ribbon of sky let in daylight and at night showed a few stars. Matt listened in vain for voices. Scar tissue had formed a knot on the bottom of his foot. He inspected the writing frequently. Property of the Alagrang estate. But the scar had sliced through the tiny lettering. It was more difficult to make out the words. One day, a frightening argument erupted between Rosa and the doctor. "El Patron wants me by his side. I'll come back once a month," the man said. "It's just an excuse to get away from me," said Rosa. "I have to work, you stupid woman." "Don't you call me stupid," the woman snarled. "I know a lying coyote when I see one." "I don't have a choice," Willem said stiffly. "Then why not take me with you? I could be a housekeeper." "El Patron doesn't need one." "Oh, sure, how convenient. Let me tell you, it's horrible working here," she stormed. "The other servants laugh at me. She takes care of the beast, they say. She's no better than a beast herself. They treat me like scum." "You're exaggerating." "No, I'm not," she cried. "Please, Take me with you, Willem. Please. I love you. I'll do anything for you. The doctor pried her arms away. You're hysterical. I'll leave you some pills and see you in a month. As soon as the door closed, Rosa hurled the bucket against the wall and cursed the doctor by all his ancestors. Her face turned chalky with rage, except for 2 splotches of red on her cheeks. Matt had never seen anyone so furious, and he found it terrifying. You're responsible for this, Rosa shrieked. She pulled Matt up by his hair. Ow! Ow! Yelled Matt. Bleating won't save you, you good-for-nothing animal. No one can hear you. This whole wing of the house is empty because you are in it. They don't even put pigs down here. Rosa thrust her face close to his. Her cheekbones stood out beneath her taut skin. Her eyes were wide, and Matt could see white all around the edges. She looked like a demon in one of the comic books Celia got from church. I could kill you, Rosa said quietly. I could bury your body under the floor, and I might do it. She let him slump to the floor again. He rubbed his head where she had pulled the hair. Or I might not. You'll never know until it's too late. But one thing you'd better understand. I'm your master now, and if you make me angry, watch out. She slammed the door as she left. Matt sat paralyzed for a few minutes. His heart pounded, and his body was slimy with sweat. What did she mean? What else could she possibly do? After a while, he stopped trembling and his breathing returned to normal. He tried the door, but not even rage had kept Rosa from locking it. He limped to the window and watched the bright strip of grass and flowers beyond the wall. That night, 2 gardeners, who refused to look at Matt, removed his bed. Rosa watched with a look of bitter satisfaction. She took away the waste bucket Matt had been forced to use since he arrived. You can go in the corner, on the newspapers, said Rosa. That's what dogs do. Matt had to lie on the cement floor without any covers, and of course without a pillow. He slept badly and his body ached like a tooth in the morning. When he had to use the newspapers in the corner, he felt dirty and ashamed. How long could this go on? Rosa merely plunked down the breakfast tray and left. She didn't scold him. At first Matt was relieved, but after a while he began to feel bad. Even angry words were better than silence. At home he would have had the stuffed bear and dog and Pedro el Conejo for company. They didn't talk, but he could hug them. Where were they now? Had Celia thrown them out because she knew he wasn't coming back? Matt ate and cried at the same time. The tears ran down into his mouth and onto the dry toast Rosa had brought. He had toast and oatmeal, scrambled eggs with chorizo sausage, a plastic mug of orange juice, a strip of cold bacon. At least she wasn't going to starve him. In the evening, Rosa brought him a flavorless stew with cement-colored gravy. Matt was given no utensils and had to put his face in the bowl like a dog. With the stew came boiled squash, an apple, and a bottle of water. He ate because he was hungry. He hated the food because it reminded him of how wonderful Celia's cooking had been. Days passed. Rosa never spoke to him. A shudder seemed to have come down over her face. She neither met Matt's eyes nor responded when he asked her questions. Her silence made him frantic. He talked feverishly when she arrived, but he might have been a stuffed bear for all the notice she took of him. Meanwhile, the smell in the room became appalling. Rosa cleaned the corner every day, but the stench clung to the cement. Matt got used to it. Rosa didn't. And one day, she exploded in another fit of rage. Isn't it enough that I have to wait on you? She cried as he cowered next to the window. I'd rather clean out a hen house. At least they're useful. What good are you? Then an idea seemed to occur to her. She halted in mid-rant and looked at Matt in such a calculating way, he felt cold right down to his toes. What was she planning now? Back came the sullen gardeners. They built a low barrier across the door. Matt watched with interest. The barrier was as high as his waist, not tall enough to keep him in, but high enough to slow him down if he tried to escape. Rosa stood in the hallway, watching and criticizing. The gardener said a few words Matt had never heard before, and Rosa turned dark with rage. But she didn't reply. After the barrier was finished, Rosa lifted Matt outside and held him tightly. He looked around eagerly. The hallway was gray and empty, hardly more interesting than the room, but at least it was different. Then something happened that made Matt's mouth fall open with surprise. The gardeners trundled down the hall with wheelbarrows piled high with sawdust. They dumped them one after the other into his room. Back and forth they went until the floor was full of sawdust heaped as high as the barrier in the doorway. Rosa suddenly swung him up by his arms and tossed him inside. He landed with a whoomp and sat up coughing. "That's what dirty beasts get to live in," she said, and slammed the door. Matt was so startled that he didn't know what to think. The whole room was full of the gray-brown powder. It was soft. He could sleep on it like a bed. He waded through the sawdust trying to figure out why it had suddenly appeared in his world. At least it was something different. Matt tunneled. He heaped the shavings into hills. He threw it into the air to watch it patter down in a plume of dust. He amused himself this way for a long time, but gradually Matt ran out of things to do with sawdust. Rosa brought him food at sundown. She spoke not a single word. He ate slowly, watching the tiny yellow light that belonged to the Virgin and listening for far-off noises from the rest of the house. "What in God's green earth have you done?" cried the doctor when he saw Matt's new environment. "It's deep litter," said Rosa. "Are you crazy? What do you care?" "Of course I care, Rosa," the doctor said, trying to take her hand. She threw him off. "And I have to care about the health of this clone. Good God, do you know what would happen if he died?" "You're only worried about what would happen to you. But don't lose sleep over it, Willem. I grew up on a poultry farm, and deep litter is by far the best way to keep chickens healthy. You let the hens run around in it, and their filth settles to the bottom. It saves their feet from getting infected." Willem laughed out loud. "You're a very strange woman, Rosa, but I have to admit the beast's in good condition. You know, I remember it talking when it lived in Celia's house. Now, it doesn't say a thing." "It's a sullen, evil-tempered animal," she said. The doctor sighed. "Clones go that way in the end. I did think this one was brighter than most." Matt said nothing, hunched as he was in a corner as far from the pair as he could get. Long days of solitude in Celia's house had taught him how to be quiet, and any attention from Willem or Rosa could result in pain. The days passed with agonizing slowness, followed by nights of misery. Matt could see little from the barred window. The pink flowers withered. The strip of sky was blue by day and black at night. He dreamed of the little house, of Celia, of a meadow so intensely green it made him cry when he woke up. And gradually it came to him that Celia had forgotten him, that she was never going to rescue him from this prison. The idea was so painful, Matt thrust it from his mind. He refused to think about her, or when he did, he quickly thought of something else to drive her image from his mind. After a while, he forgot what she looked like, except in dreams. But Matt still fought against the dullness that threatened to overwhelm him. He hid caches of food under the sawdust, not to eat later, but to attract bugs. The window wasn't glassed, and so all sorts of small creatures could come in through the bars. First, he attracted wasps to a chunk of apple. Then he lured a glorious buzzing fly to a piece of spoiled meat. It sat on the meat, just as though it had been invited to dinner, and rubbed its hairy paws as it gloated over the meal. Afterward, Matt discovered a writhing mass of worms living in the meat, and he watched them grow and eventually turn into buzzing flies themselves. He found this extremely interesting. Then, of course, there were the cockroaches. Small, brown ones struggled through the sawdust, and big, leathery bombers zoomed through the air and made Rosa scream. "You're a monster," she cried. "It wouldn't surprise me if you ate them." Oh, yes, there were all kinds of entertainment in bugs. One magical day, a dove pushed its way through the bars and rummaged through the sawdust. Matt sat perfectly still, entranced by the bird's beauty. When it flew away, it left a single pearl-gray feather behind, which Matt hid from Rosa. He assumed that anything beautiful would be destroyed by her. He sang to himself, inside, where Rosa couldn't hear, one of Celia's lullabies. Buenos días, paloma blanca. Hoy te vengo a saludar. Good morning, white dove. Today I come to greet thee. Celia said it was a song to the Virgin. It occurred to Matt that this dove had come from the Virgin, and that the feather meant she would watch over him here, as she had done in the little house. One day, he heard footsteps outside. He looked up to see a strange new face on the other side of the bars. It was a boy, somewhat older than himself, with bristly red hair and freckles. "You're ugly," said the boy. "You look like a pig in a sty." Matt wanted to reply, but the habit of silence had grown too strong. He could only glare at the intruder. In the hazy background of his mind, he recalled a boy named Tom, who was bad. "Do something," said Tom. "Root around. Scratch your piggy behind on the wall. I have to have something to tell Maria." Matt flinched. He remembered a cheerful little girl with black hair, who worried about him and was punished for bringing him food. So she had returned, and she hadn't come to see him. "That got you, didn't it? Wait till I tell your girlfriend how cute you are now. You smell like a pile of dung." Matt felt idly beneath the sawdust for something he'd been feeding to bugs. It was an entire orange. At first it had been green, but time had turned it blue and very soft. Worms filled the inside, diverting Matt with their wiggling bodies. He curled his fingers around the orange. It held its shape, barely. "I forgot. You're too dumb to talk. You're a stupid clone who wets his pants and barfs all over his feet. Maybe if I spoke your language, you'd understand." Tom put his face against the bars and grunted. At the same instant, Matt flung the orange. His accuracy was excellent because he had spent days aiming fruit at targets. The rotten orange burst apart all over Tom's face. He jumped back, screaming, "It's moving! It's moving!" Pulp dripped off his chin. Wiggly worms dropped into his collar. "I'll get you for this!" he shrieked as he ran away. Matt felt deeply peaceful. The room might look like a featureless desert to Rosa, but to him, it was a kingdom of hidden delights. Underneath the sawdust, and he knew exactly where, were caches of nutshells, seeds, bones, fruit, and gristle. The gristle was particularly valuable. You could stretch it, bend it, hold it up to the light, and even suck on it if it wasn't too old. The bones were his dolls. He could make them have adventures and talk to them. Matt closed his eyes. He would like to lock up Rosa and the doctor. He would feed them wormy oranges and sour milk. They would beg him to let them go, but he wouldn't. Not ever. He fished up the dove feather and contemplated its silky colors. The feather usually made him feel safe, but now it made him feel uneasy. Celia said the Virgin loved all kind and gentle things. She wouldn't approve of throwing a rotten orange in Tom's face, even if he deserved it. If she looked inside Matt, she would see the bad thoughts about Rosa and the doctor, and be sad. Matt found he was sad too. It wouldn't really hurt them, he thought, so the Virgin could see that and smile. Still, he couldn't help feeling the warm sensation of pleasure at having zinged Tom. But as Celia had once told him, a smart person doesn't spit into the wind. If you throw a rotten orange into someone's face, you can bet the orange will sooner or later come flying back. In less than an hour, Tom returned with a pea shooter. Matt was clad only in a pair of shorts, so the peas landed on his bare skin. At first he tried to dodge them, but there was nowhere to run in the narrow little room. Matt settled in a corner with his head cradled in his arms to protect his face. He instinctively understood that if he refused to react, Tom would lose interest. It still took a long time. The boy outside seemed to have an endless supply of peas. But eventually he called Matt a few bad names and went away. Matt waited a long time to be sure. He could be very patient. He thought of Pedro el Conejo, who explored Señor McGregor's garden and lost all his clothes. Matt, too, had lost all his clothes, except for the shorts. Rosa said he would only ruin them. Finally he looked up and saw his kingdom was in disarray. Running around had destroyed the marks that told Matt what lay below. Sighing, he worked his way through the sawdust. He felt underneath to find his treasures. He combed the surface smooth with his fingers and renewed the lines and hollows that told him where everything was. It was very much like Celia moving the furniture out to vacuum the rugs and then moving it back again. When he was finished, Matt sat in his corner and waited for Rosa to bring his dinner. But something shocking and unbelievable happened first. "Mi hijo," cried Celia from the window. My child, I didn't know you were here. Oh, God, they told me you were with El Patron. I didn't know." She was holding Maria up to the window in the crook of her arm. "He looks different," observed Maria. "They starved him, the animals, and took his clothes. Come here, darling, I want to touch you." Celia jammed her big hand through the bars. "Let me see you, mi vida. I can't believe what's happened." But Matt could only stare. He wanted to go. He had dreamed of nothing else. But now that the moment had actually come, he couldn't move. It was too good to be true. If he gave in and ran to Celia, something bad would happen. Celia would turn into Rosa, and Maria would turn into Tom. The disappointment would break him into pieces. "Hey, idiot, I went to a lot of trouble to come here," Maria said. "Are you too weak to stand?" Celia cried suddenly. "Oh my God, have they broken your legs? At least say something. They haven't torn out your tongue." She began to wail like La Llorona. She stretched her hand through the bars. Her misery tore at Matt, and still he couldn't move or speak. "You're squeezing me," complained Maria, so Celia put her down. The little girl managed to stand tall enough to peer through the window. "My dog Furball was like that when the dog catcher got him. I cried and cried until Dada brought him back. Furball wouldn't eat or look at me for a whole day, but he got over it. I'm sure Matt will too." "Out of the mouths of babies comes wisdom," said Celia. "I'm not a baby." "Of course not, darling. You only reminded me that the most important thing is to get Matt free," Celia said, smoothing Maria's hair. "We can worry about the other stuff later. If I give you a letter, can you keep it a secret from everyone? Especially Tom?" "Sure," said Maria. "I hate to do it," Celia said, half to herself. "I hate like crazy to do it. But there is only one person who can save Matt. Maria, you must take the letter to your Dada. He'll know where to send it." "Okay," said Maria cheerfully. "Hey, Matt, Celia's going to put chiles in Tom's hot chocolate tonight. Only you mustn't tell anyone." "And you mustn't either," said Celia. "Okay." "Don't you worry," the woman called to Matt. "I've got more tricks up my sleeve than Old Man Coyote has fleas. I'll get you out of there, my love." Matt was frankly relieved to see them go. They were an unwelcome intrusion in the orderly world he had created. He could forget them now and get back to the contemplation of his kingdom. The surface of the sawdust was combed smooth, the treasures hidden beneath marks that only he, the king, understood. A bee wandered in, found nothing, and left. A spider mended its web high up near the ceiling. Matt took out the dove feather and lost himself in its silky perfection. Middle age, 7 to 11. Chapter 6. El Patrón. Get up! Get up! Shouted Rosa. Matt had been sleeping in a hollow formed by his body. As he slept, he sank down until the sawdust almost covered him. The sudden awakening made him gasp. The sawdust went up his nose, and he doubled over, coughing and retching. Get up! Oh, you're impossible. I've got to wash you, dress you, and who knows what else. You're nothing but trouble. Rosa yanked him up by the hair and dragged him out of the room. Matt was hurried down dingy hallways and past doorways that opened into rooms both cramped and gloomy. A maid scrubbed the floor with a big brush. She looked up with hopeless eyes as Rosa rushed him past. Rosa pushed him into a steamy bathroom. A tub stained with rust was already full of water. The woman shucked Matt out of his shorts before he knew what was happening and dumped him inside. It was the first bath he'd had since being locked up. Matt felt like a thirsty sponge soaking up water until he was so full that he could hardly move. The warmth soothed his skin, which had become itchy and sore. Sit up! I haven't got all day, growled Rosa, setting to work with a brush almost as big as the one in the hallway. She scoured him until he was pink, dried him with a big fluffy towel, and tried to get a comb through his tangled hair. In a fury because it wouldn't come right, she grabbed a pair of scissors and cut it all off. They want tidy, they'll get tidy, she muttered. She stuffed Matt into a long-sleeve shirt and trousers and gave him a pair of rubber sandals to wear. Very soon he was being hurried across a courtyard to another part of the house. His legs ached with the effort of walking. Halfway across the courtyard, his feet tangled in the unfamiliar sandals, and he stumbled against Rosa. She took the opportunity to lecture him. The doctor will be there, she said, and so will important members of the family. They'll want to make sure you're healthy. If they ask questions, don't answer. Above all, don't say anything about me. She brought her face down close to his. You'll be all alone with me in that little room, she whispered. I swear, I'll kill you and bury you under the floor if you make trouble. Matt had no trouble believing her. He forced his trembling legs to follow her to a part of the house as different from his old prison as the sun was from a candle. The walls were painted cream and rose and pale green. It was so bright and cheerful it raised his spirits in spite of Rosa's dire threats. The floor gleamed with polish that made Matt feel like he was walking on water. Windows looked out on gardens with fountains. They splashed and glittered in the sun. A magnificent bird with a long green tail stepped delicately across a walk. Matt wanted to stop, but Rosa shoved him on, all the while cursing beneath her breath. Finally, they came to a large room with a marvelous carpet woven with birds and vines. Matt wanted to kneel down and touch them. Stand up, hissed Rosa. He saw windows framed by blue curtains that went from floor to ceiling. A small table set with a teapot, cups, and a silver plate of cookies sat next to a flowered armchair. Matt's mouth watered at the memory of cookies. Come closer, boy, said an old voice. Rosa gasped. Her hand dropped from Matt's shoulder. El patrón, she whispered. Matt saw that what he'd taken for an empty armchair actually contained a man. He was extremely thin, with shoulder-length white hair neatly combed beside a face so seamed and wrinkled it hardly seemed real. He was wearing a dressing gown, and his knees were covered by a blanket. It was the blanket that had fooled Matt into thinking the old man was part of the chair. It's all right, said Celia from behind him. Matt whirled to see her in the doorway. His heart lurched with relief. Celia brushed past Rosa and took his hand. He's had a bad time, mi patrón. For 6 months, they've kept him like a wild animal. You lie, snarled Rosa. I've seen it with my own eyes. Maria Mendoza told me. She's a baby. Who can believe a baby? I can, said Celia quietly. She hadn't been to the house for 6 months. When she arrived, she asked to see Matt, and Tom boasted that he'd shot him dead. She flew straight to me.
"Shot him? Is he hurt?" said the old man.
He was already hurt.
Celia described the injuries caused by the broken glass. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" demanded el patron. His voice wasn't loud, but there was a quality to it that made Matt shiver, even though he, for once, wasn't the one in trouble.
"It was the doctor's place to do it,"
Rosa cried. "It was everyone's place to do it," said the old man in the same cold way. "Take off your shirt, boy."
Matt didn't dream of disobeying. He unbuttoned the shirt rapidly and dropped it to the floor.
"Dios mío! My God!"
"Those bruises must be from Tom's pea shooter," said Celia, sounding ready to cry. "See how thin he is, mi patron. And he's got some kind of rash. He wasn't like that in my house, sir."
"Call the doctor."
Instantly, he must have been waiting outside the door, Willem entered and began examining Matt. He shook his head as though he were genuinely surprised by the boy's condition. "He's suffering from mild malnutrition," the doctor said. "He has sores in his mouth. His skin condition, I would say, comes from a combination of dirt and an allergic reaction to chicken litter."
"Chicken litter?" said the old man.
"I understand he was kept in a room full of sawdust to cut down on housekeeping."
"You knew about it, Willem," cried Rosa. "You didn't tell me it was wrong."
"I knew nothing about it until today," said the doctor.
"You're lying. Tell them, Willem. You thought it was funny. You said the boy, was in good condition."
"She's suffering from delusions," the doctor told El Patron. "It's a shame such an unstable individual was allowed to have a position of responsibility." Rosa flew at the doctor and raked his face with her nails before he was able to grasp her wrists. She kicked and screamed, driving Willem back with the force of her rage. She actually bared her teeth like a wild animal, and Matt watched with interest to see whether she would manage to sink them into the man's neck. Everything seemed unreal to him. The sudden appearance of Celia, the old man, the furious battle between his two enemies. It was like watching TV. But before Rosa could do any serious harm, a pair of burly men rushed through the door and dragged her away.
"Willem! Willem!" she wailed.
Her voice grew fainter as she was carried off. Matt heard a door slam, and then he heard nothing. He became aware that Celia was hugging him. He felt her body tremble as she held him close. The doctor mopped his face with a handkerchief. He was bleeding from a dozen scratches. Only El Patron appeared tranquil. He had settled back in the armchair, and his pale lips were drawn up in a smile.
"Well, that's the most excitement I've had in months," he said.
"I apologize, mi patron," said Willem shakily. "This must have been a terrible shock to you. I'll check your blood pressure at once."
"Oh, stop fussing," El Patron said, waving him off. "My life is far too quiet these days. This was most entertaining."
He turned his attention to Matt.
"So, they kept you on litter like a barnyard fowl. Tell me, boy, did you learn to cackle?"
Matt smiled. He liked El Patron instinctively. There was something so right about the way the old man looked. His eyes were a good color. Matt didn't know why it was good, only that it was. El Patron's face seemed oddly familiar, and his hands, thin and blue-veined, had a shape that appealed to Matt in some deep way.
"Come here, boy."
Without the slightest hesitation, Matt walked up to the chair and let the old man stroke his face with a paper-dry hand.
"So young," El Patron murmured.
"You can speak now, mi vida," said Celia, but Matt wasn't ready to go that far.
"Mi vida, I like that," the old man said with a chuckle. "I like it so much, in fact, it's what I'll call him. Can he talk?"
"I think he's in shock. In my house he chattered away like a tree full of birds. And he can read both English and Spanish. He's very intelligent, mi patron."
"Of course. He's my clone. Tell me, mi vida, do you like cookies?"
Matt nodded.
"Then you shall have them. Celia, put his shirt back on and find him a chair. We have much to talk about."
The next hour passed like a dream. Both the doctor and Celia were sent away,
The old man and the boy sat across from each other and dined not only on cookies, but on cream chicken, mashed potatoes, and applesauce as well. A maid brought them in from the kitchen. El Patron said these foods were his favorites, and Matt decided they were his favorites too. El Patron had said they had much to talk about, but in fact only he did any talking. He rambled on about his youth in Aztlán. It was called Mexico when he was a boy, he said. He came from a place called Durango. People from Durango are called alacranes, scorpions, because there are so many of them scurrying around. When I made my first million, I took that as my name, Mateo Alacrán. Is your name too? Matt smiled, well pleased that he shared something with El Patron. As the old man talked, Matt pictured in his mind the dusty cornfields and purple mountains of Durango. He saw the stream that roared with water 2 months of the year and was dry as a bone the rest of the time. El Patron swam with his brothers, but alas, they died of various things before they had a chance to grow up. El Patron's sisters were carried off by typhoid when they were so small they couldn't look over the windowsill. No, not even if they stood on tiptoe. Matt thought of Maria and worried. Those little girls weren't as old as she when they were carried off by the typhoid. He wondered if that monster resembled the chupacabras. Of all those children, only one lived, Mateo Alacrán. He was skinny as a coyote, with not even 2 pesos to rub together, but he was filled with a burning desire to survive. At last, the voice fell silent. Matt looked up to see that El Patron had fallen asleep in his chair. Matt was exhausted, too. He was so full of food he had been half asleep for some time. The same men who had taken Rosa now entered, gently lifted El Patron into a wheelchair, and rolled him away. Matt worried about what would happen to him now. Would Rosa come back and throw him into the sawdust? Would she make good on her promise to bury him alive? But it was Celia who triumphantly bore him away. She took him to her new apartment in the big house. Her possessions had been moved from the old place, so Matt wasn't too disappointed about not returning home. The Virgin sat, as she always had, on a table by his bed. She had gained a new wreath of plastic roses about her robe, and a white lace tablecloth beneath her from Celia, in gratitude for restoring Matt to safety. All in all, he was pleased with the change, although he missed the doves cooing on the roof and the wind blowing through the poppies. "Listen up, Egypt," commanded Maria. "I'm supposed to make you talk." Matt shrugged. He had no interest in talking, and besides, Maria did enough for both of them. "I know you can do it. Celia says you're in shock, but I think you're just lazy." Matt yawned and scratched his armpit. "El Patron is going away today." Now Maria had Matt's interest. He was dismayed that the old man was leaving. He hadn't seen him since the day he was rescued. Celia said the excitement had been too much for someone who was 140 years old. El Patron had to stay in bed until he felt well enough to travel to his other house in the Chiricahua Mountains. "We have to say goodbye to him. Everyone's coming, and you'd better talk, or you'll be in big trouble." Maria squeezed Matt's mouth as though she could force the words out. He snapped at her. The little girl scrambled away. "You said you didn't bite," she screamed. She grabbed a pillow and hit him several times before collapsing on the bed. "Bad clone," said Maria, hugging the pillow to her chest. Matt considered the idea. Being a clone was bad no matter what you did, so why bother being good at all? He reached over and patted her hand. "Oh, why won't you talk?" stormed Maria. "It's been over a week. It took Furball only 1 day to forgive me after the dog catcher got him." Matt wasn't trying to upset her. He couldn't talk. When he tried to make the words, he was overcome with terror. To speak was to open a door into his carefully built fortress, and anything might rush inside. "Matt was locked up a lot longer than your dog," said Celia as she entered the room. She knelt down and stroked Matt's face. "Furball was gone only 2 days. Matt was trapped for 6 months. It takes time to recover." "Is that how it works?" the little girl asked. "The longer you're sick, the longer it takes to get better?" Celia nodded.
She kept stroking Matt's face, his hair, his arms. It was as though she were trying to bring feeling back into his body. "Then I guess," Maria said slowly, "it's going to take years for El Patron to get well." "Don't talk about that," cried Celia so sharply that Maria hugged the pillow and stared goggle-eyed at the woman. "Don't say anything about El Patron. Shoo, I don't have time to entertain you." Celia flapped her apron at the girl, who fled without another word. Matt felt sorry for Maria. He purposely made his body go stiff to make it hard for Celia to dress him, but Celia didn't get angry. She hugged him and sang him her favorite lullaby. "Buenos días, paloma blanca. Hoy te vengo a saludar." Matt shivered. It was the song to the Virgin, who loved all gentle things and who had watched over him in prison. Then he knew it was wrong to be mean to Celia and let himself go limp again. "That's my good boy," murmured the woman. "You're a good boy, and I love you." Matt suffered a moment of panic when she tried to lead him outside. He felt safe in his old bed, with the stuffed animals and the tattered copy of Pedro el Conejo. He kept the blinds closed, even though the windows looked out onto a beautiful walled garden. He didn't want anything new in his life, no matter how beautiful. "It's all right. I won't let anyone hurt you," said Celia, lifting him in her arms. Matt had not seen the front of the big house yet. He was enchanted by the marble-walled entranceway and statues of fat babies with stubby wings. In the center was a dark pond covered with water lilies. Matt clutched Celia when he saw a large fish rise casually from the depths to look at him with a round, yellow eye. They passed between fluted white pillars to a porch with wide stairs leading down to a driveway. Everyone was lined up on the porch, servants to one side and family on the other. He saw Stephen, Emilia, and Maria standing at attention. When Maria tried to sit down, Emilia yanked her up again. Matt saw Tom holding Maria's hand and felt an almost uncontrollable surge of anger. How dare he be friends with her? How dare she be friends with him? If Matt had another wormy orange, he'd hurl it again, no matter what. El Patron sat in a wheelchair with a blanket over his legs. The burly men Matt had seen before guarded him. Willem stood nearby, dressed in a gray suit too warm for the day. His face was shiny with sweat. Of Rosa, there was no sign. "Come here, mi vida," said El Patron. The old man's voice was clearly audible over the sounds of birds and fountains. It had a quality that commanded attention, in spite of its weakness. Celia put Matt down. Matt walked to the wheelchair eagerly. He liked everything about El Patron. His voice, the shape of his face, and his eyes, which were the color of the dark pond with the fish lurking in its depths. "Show him to the family, Willem," the old man said. The doctor's hand was damp. Matt felt a revulsion to him, but he allowed himself to be led around the porch. He was introduced to Mr. Alacrán, the fierce man who had thrown Matt out that first night and who was Benito's, Stephen's, and Tom's father. Benito, it was explained, was away at college, and Matt would meet him another day. Mr. Alacrán looked at Matt with undisguised loathing. Felicia, Mr. Alacrán's wife, was a frail woman with long, nervous fingers. She had been a great concert pianist, the doctor said, until illness forced her to retire. Felicia flashed Willem a quick smile that disappeared when she looked at Matt. With her was Mr. Alacrán's father, an old man with white hair who seemed unsure of why he was on the porch. Then Matt met, again, Stephen, Emilia, Maria, and Tom. Tom gave Matt a scowl, which Matt returned. No one, except Maria, seemed pleased to meet him, but they all pretended to be friendly. It's because they're afraid of El Patron, Matt realized. He didn't know why, but it was very good that they were. "Has El Gato, the cat, still got your tongue?" inquired the old man when Matt was at last brought back to the wheelchair. Matt nodded. "Celia will have to work on that. Listen, all of you," El Patron said in a slightly louder voice. "This is my clone. He's the most important person in my life. If you thought it was any of you sorry misbegotten swine, think again." The old man chuckled softly. "Matt is to be treated with respect, just as though I were here in his place. He is to be educated, well-fed, and entertained. He is not to be mistreated. El Padrón looked directly at Tom, who flushed red. Anyone who harms Matt will be dealt with severely. Do I make myself clear? Yes, mi patrón, murmured several voices. And to be absolutely sure, I'm leaving one of my bodyguards behind. Which of you louts volunteers for the duty? The bodyguards shuffled their feet and looked down. Overcome with shyness, I see, El Padrón said. I picked up this lot in Scotland, breaking heads outside a soccer field. Always choose your bodyguards from another country, Matt. They find it harder to make alliances and betray you. Well, Matt, you make the choice. Which of these shrinking violets do you want for a playmate? Appalled, Matt looked at the men. Anyone less playful could hardly be imagined. They were thick-necked and brutal, with flattened noses and scars wandering across their arms and faces. They both had curling brown hair that grew low upon their foreheads, ruddy faces, and bright blue eyes. That one's Daft Donald. He likes to juggle bowling balls. Tam Lin is the one with the interesting ears. Matt shifted his gaze from one to the other. Daft Donald was younger and less battered. He seemed a safer person to have around. Tam Lin's ears appeared chewed. They were so misshapen. But when Matt looked into Tam Lin's eyes, he was surprised to see a glint of friendliness. Friendliness was so rare in Matt's life, he instantly pointed to the man. Good decision, whispered El Padrón. With the introductions disposed of, energy seemed to desert him. He sank back in the wheelchair and closed his eyes. Goodbye, mi vida. Until next time, he murmured. The alacrans crowded around and assured El Padrón of their fond regards. He ignored them. Then Daft Donald lifted him, chair and all, and carried him down the stairs to a waiting limousine. Everyone followed, calling out their good wishes. When the car drove off, the family members hurried away. The servants parted around Matt as though he were a rock in a stream and vanished into the house. He was ignored. Not mistreated, just ignored. Only Maria had to be dragged off, complaining loudly. Celia waited patiently for the crowd to clear, and Tam Lin. Well, laddie, let's see what you're made of, said Tam Lin, scooping up Matt in one beefy arm and slinging him over his shoulder.